The Colorado sun beat down mercilessly on the parched earth, turning what had once been fields of vibrant green into brittle stretches of yellowed grass that crunched underfoot. The summer of 1882 had been particularly harsh, as if the heavens themselves had forgotten how to weep. Ethan Calloway stood motionless before a simple grave. The headstone was modest, weathered by 2 years of sun and snow, but the name carved into it remained clear. Joseph Calloway, 1867 to 1880. 2 years to the day since his son had drawn his final breath, taken by the same consumption that had claimed so many others in these parts. Ethan's weathered hands, calloused from years of working the land, gently placed a wildflower on the grave. Beside it, he set a small harmonica, the last gift he had given his son before the illness had made it impossible for the boy to play. The brass instrument caught the sunlight, sending a brief flash of gold across the headstone. "I miss you, Joseph," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion rarely expressed. "Every single day." The cemetery stood on a gentle slope overlooking the valley where Ethan's farm lay. Once prosperous, now barely maintained. Just enough work done to keep it from falling apart entirely, much like the man himself. When he finally turned to leave, the sun was beginning its descent toward the distant mountains. Ethan's tall frame cast a long shadow as he made his way back to his horse, his shoulders bearing the invisible weight of a grief that had not lightened with the passage of time. The ride home was silent save for the rhythmic hoofbeats and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. As the farm came into view, Ethan noticed something unusual. A wagon parked near his front porch, 2 figures standing beside it waiting. His body tensed instinctively. Visitors were rare these days. Most folks in town had learned to leave Ethan Calloway to his solitude, having grown tired of his terse responses and unwelcoming demeanor. As he drew closer, recognition dawned. The larger figure was Reverend Gabriel Wilson. Not just a man of the cloth, but someone who had known Ethan in another life. They had served together during the war between the states. Gabriel as a chaplain, Ethan as a field surgeon. Gabriel was one of the few people who knew that before Ethan Calloway became a reclusive farmer, he had been Dr. Ethan Calloway, a physician whose hands had saved countless lives on blood-soaked battlefields. The second figure was much smaller, a boy no more than 11 or 12, thin as a rail in clothes that hung loose on his frame. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't need to ask why they were here. Gabriel had tried this before, bringing strays, orphans, people in need. As if filling the void in Ethan's life would somehow heal what had been broken. "Ethan," Gabriel called as he approached, his voice carrying the warmth that Ethan's had long since lost. "It's good to see you, old friend." Ethan dismounted without returning the greeting, tying his horse to the post. He nodded curtly toward Gabriel, deliberately avoiding looking at the boy. "What brings you all the way out here, Gabriel?" His tone made it clear this wasn't a social call he welcomed. Gabriel smiled, undeterred by the cold reception. "This is Nathan," he said, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "He's been at the Denver orphanage for about 8 months now." Now Ethan did look at the boy, if only briefly. Nathan had sandy brown hair that needed cutting, falling into eyes that seemed too old for his young face. The child's gaze met Ethan's for just a moment before dropping respectfully to the ground. "And," Ethan prompted, already walking past them toward his front door. Gabriel followed, gesturing for Nathan to come along. "The boy needs a place to stay, Ethan. Just for a few weeks while we find a more permanent arrangement." Ethan stopped at his porch steps, turning to face Gabriel with undisguised irritation. "I'm not a boarding house, Gabriel. I can't help you." There was something in Nathan's expression then, not hurt exactly, but a quiet resignation that suggested he was well accustomed to rejection. It stirred something uncomfortable in Ethan's chest. "Perhaps we could discuss this inside," Gabriel suggested, his tone making it less a question than a gentle command. Reluctantly, Ethan opened the door to the farmhouse. It was cool inside, if somewhat dusty. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace along one wall, a simple wooden table with chairs, and a few pieces of worn furniture. A doorway led to a narrow hallway, where the bedrooms lay, and against the far wall stood an upright piano, its wood dulled with age upon lacks of polish. Nathan's eyes went immediately to the instrument, a flicker of interest crossing his face, before he composed himself once more. "The boy can wait outside," Ethan said, but Gabriel was already ushering Nathan to a chair at the table. "Sit here for a moment, Nathan. The Reverend needs to speak with Mr. Calloway." Once the boy was seated, Gabriel took Ethan by the elbow and led him to the far corner of the room, speaking in a low voice that wouldn't carry. "The boy is dying, Ethan." The words hung in the air between them, stark and heavy. "What?" Ethan's eyes darted to Nathan, who sat with his hands folded in his lap, gaze downcast. "He has a tumor on his back," Gabriel continued. "It's growing. The doctor at the orphanage says he has perhaps 2 or 3 months left." Ethan felt a cold sensation spreading through his chest. "And you brought him to me, a dying child." His voice was barely above a whisper, but the intensity in it was unmistakable. "Because you know I failed to save Joseph. You want me to fail again?" Gabriel's expression softened with understanding. "No, Ethan. I brought him to you because you both need healing." "I don't need." "You do," Gabriel interrupted, a rare firmness in his voice. "Look at yourself. Look at this place. You're barely living. It's been 2 years, Ethan. Joseph wouldn't want this for you." The mention of his son's name was like a physical blow. Ethan turned away, unable to meet Gabriel's gaze. "The boy has no one," Gabriel continued. "The families who might have taken him lost interest when they learned of his condition. No one wants to open their heart to a child they know they'll lose." "And you think I do?" Ethan's laugh was bitter. "I think you, more than anyone, understand what he's going through." Gabriel placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "And perhaps he might understand something of what you're going through as well." Ethan looked over at Nathan again. The boy sat perfectly still, patient, in a way that spoke of long hours spent waiting in hospital rooms and doctors' offices. There was a dignity about him even in his threadbare clothes and too thin frame. "Just a few days," Gabriel pressed, "while I look for another placement. That's all I'm asking." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, feeling trapped. To refuse would be to send the boy back to the orphanage, where he would likely spend his final days surrounded by strangers. Even in his current state, Ethan couldn't bring himself to be that cruel. "A few days," he finally conceded. "That's all." Relief washed over Gabriel's features. "Thank you, Ethan. I knew I could count on you." Ethan grunted, already regretting his decision. "He can stay in the spare room. Not—" He stopped himself. "Not Joseph's room." Gabriel nodded in understanding. "Nathan," he called, and the boy looked up expectantly. "Mr. Calloway has agreed to let you stay for a while. I'll be back to check on you in a few days." Nathan stood clutching a small canvas bag that apparently contained all his worldly possessions. "Thank you, sir," he said to Ethan, his voice quiet but clear. Gabriel embraced the boy briefly, whispering something in his ear that made Nathan nod solemnly. Then, with a final grateful look at Ethan, the Reverend took his leave. Silence filled the house as the sound of Gabriel's wagon faded into the distance. Ethan and Nathan stood awkwardly in the main room, neither quite knowing how to proceed. "I'll show you where you'll sleep," Ethan finally said, turning toward the hallway without waiting to see if the boy followed. The spare room was small and sparsely furnished, a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a single chair beside a window that looked out over the eastern fields. It had been used for storage more than anything else in recent years, and a thin layer of dust covered most surfaces. "It's not much," Ethan said, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. "It's perfect, sir," Nathan replied, setting his bag carefully on the bed. "Thank you for letting me stay." Something about the boy's quiet gratitude made Ethan uncomfortable. It would be easier if the child complained or demanded more. Then Ethan could feel justified in his reluctance. "I'll leave you to get settled," he said gruffly. "Supper's at 6. With that, he retreated, leaving Nathan alone in the small room that would be his home for what Ethan hoped would be a very brief stay. The first evening passed in awkward silence. Ethan prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, setting a plate before Nathan without ceremony. The boy ate slowly, taking small, careful bites, his movements measured as if conserving energy. "Is the food all right?" Ethan found himself asking, surprised by his own concern. Nathan looked up, startled by the question. "Yes, sir. It's very good. Thank you." They lapsed back into silence until the meal was finished. Nathan insisted on helping with the dishes, despite Ethan's protest that it wasn't necessary. The boy moved carefully, but Ethan noticed how he occasionally shifted his weight, as if to alleviate discomfort in his back. When the kitchen was clean, Nathan stood uncertainly in the middle of the room, clearly unsure what was expected of him. "You can do as you please until bedtime," Ethan said. "There are some books on the shelf there if you're interested." Nathan nodded gratefully and moved to examine the small collection of volumes. His fingers trailed reverently over the spines before selecting one, a book of natural history that had been Joseph's favorite. Ethan felt a pang watching the boy settle into a chair by the window with the same book his son had loved. As dusk fell, Ethan lit the lamps and busied himself with small tasks, trying not to watch, as Nathan read quietly, his small face intent on the pages. The boy seemed to sense when it was an appropriate time to retire, closing the book carefully and returning it to its exact place on the shelf. "Good night, Mr. Calloway," he said softly. "Thank you again for your kindness." Ethan merely nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He listened to the boy's light footsteps retreating down the hallway, followed by the gentle click of the bedroom door. Only then did Ethan allow himself to exhale, unaware that he had been holding his breath. He sank into his chair, suddenly exhausted. The day had brought memories of Joseph, as the anniversary always did, but now there was this new presence in his home, a dying boy who moved with the same careful deliberation that Joseph had shown in his final months. Sleep did not come easily that night. Ethan lay awake, listening to the familiar sounds of his home, the creak of the timbers cooling in the night air, the distant howl of a coyote, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods outside his window. But now there was a new sound, too faint to identify clearly. He strained to hear, realizing after a moment that it was the sound of Nathan moving in his sleep, perhaps trying to find a position that didn't press against the tumor on his back. Just a few days, Ethan reminded himself. He could endure anything for a few days. Morning arrived with the first rays of sunlight streaming through the east-facing windows. Ethan rose, as he always did, dressing quickly and making his way to the kitchen to start coffee brewing. He was surprised to find Nathan already up, standing at the window that overlooked the barnyard. "Good morning, sir," the boy said, turning at the sound of Ethan's entrance. "I hope I'm not in the way." "No," Ethan replied, somewhat taken aback by the child's early rising. "Have you been up long?" Nathan shook his head. "Just a little while. I like watching the sun come up." There was something about the way he said it, as if each sunrise was precious something to be savored rather than taken for granted. It was the perspective of someone who knew their sunrises were numbered. Ethan busied himself with breakfast preparations, trying to ignore the discomfort that thought brought. "Do you like eggs?" he asked, more to fill the silence than out of any real concern for the boy's preferences. "Yes, sir. I can help if you'd like." "No need," Ethan said quickly, but Nathan was already moving to fetch plates from the shelf. They worked around each other in the small kitchen, Nathan setting the table, while Ethan prepared scrambled eggs and more of yesterday's cornbread. The domesticity of it was unsettling. It had been so long since Ethan had shared these simple morning rituals with anyone. After breakfast, Ethan explained that he had chores to attend to. "You can rest here," he told Nathan. "No need to strain yourself." But the boy shook his head. "I'd like to help if I may. I'm stronger than I look." Ethan doubted this, given the boy's thin frame and the knowledge of what was growing inside him, but he didn't have the heart to refuse. "Very well, but you'll tell me if you get tired." Nathan nodded earnestly. "Yes, sir." They started with the chickens gathering eggs and spreading feed. Nathan moved with surprising efficiency, clearly familiar with farm work. He approached each task with quiet determination, asking intelligent questions about how Ethan managed various aspects of the farm. As the morning progressed, Ethan found himself explaining more than he had intended. About crop rotation, about the best time to plant corn, about how to predict weather changes by watching the behavior of animals. Nathan listened with genuine interest, absorbing everything. It was when they moved to the task of carrying water from the well to fill the horse trough that the boy's condition became evident. Nathan had insisted on helping, taking a smaller bucket than Ethan's. They were halfway to the trough when the boy suddenly gasped, the bucket dropping from his hands as he doubled over in pain. Ethan was at his side in an instant, medical instincts taking over before he could suppress them. "Nathan, what is it? Where does it hurt?" The boy was bent forward, one hand braced against his knee, the other pressed to his lower back. "I'm sorry," he managed through gritted teeth. "I dropped the water." "Never mind the water," Ethan said carefully, helping Nathan to stand upright. "Let's get you inside." Nathan tried to protest, but another wave of pain silenced him. He leaned against Ethan as they made their way back to the house, his small body trembling with the effort of walking. Inside, Ethan eased the boy onto a chair. "Let me see your back," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, Nathan turned in the chair, allowing Ethan to lift his shirt. What Ethan saw made his breath catch. A large, irregular swelling protruded from the right side of the boy's lower back. The skin over it stretched tight and slightly reddened. Ethan's fingers moved with the precision of his medical training, gently probing the area around the tumor. Nathan flinched but didn't cry out. "How long has it been like this?" Ethan asked, his voice softer than it had been since Nathan's arrival. "A few months," Nathan replied. "It's gotten bigger recently." Ethan carefully lowered the boy's shirt. "And the pain? How often does it come?" Nathan hesitated. "Most days, but usually not this bad. I think I lifted the bucket wrong." Ethan moved around to face the boy, kneeling to bring himself to eye level. What he saw in Nathan's eyes wasn't fear or self-pity, but something far worse. The stoic acceptance of someone trying not to be a burden. It was the same look Joseph had worn in his final months, trying so hard to spare his father additional pain. "Nathan," Ethan said, finding it difficult to maintain his emotional distance, "you shouldn't be carrying buckets at all. Not with—" He couldn't bring himself to name the tumor aloud. "I'm not useless," Nathan said quietly. a flash of determination crossing his features. "I can still help. I want to help." Ethan recognized the plea behind the words, not to be treated as if he were already gone, not to be defined solely by his illness. It was what Joseph had wanted too in the end. "All right," he conceded. "But lighter tasks only. And you'll rest when you need to, understood." Nathan nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." For the remainder of the day, Ethan kept a closer eye on the boy, assigning him only the simplest chores. Nathan tackled each one with the same quiet diligence, though Ethan noticed he moved more carefully now, no longer trying to hide his discomfort. That evening, as they sat at the table eating a stew Ethan had prepared, the farmer found himself studying Nathan more openly. The boy ate slowly, taking small bites, his face occasionally tensing when he shifted position. "Do you have medicine?" Ethan asked abruptly. "For the pain?" Nathan looked up, surprised by the question. "Yes, sir. The doctor at the orphanage gave me some pills." "Are you taking them?" The boy hesitated, then shook his head. "I'm saving them, for when it gets really bad." Ethan felt a surge of frustration, not at Nathan, but at the situation. A child shouldn't have to ration pain relief, shouldn't have to endure suffering to prepare for worse to come. "Nathan," he said, trying to keep his voice gentle, "there's no medal for suffering unnecessarily. If you're in pain, you should take your medicine." Nathan studied his plate. "They make me sleepy and fuzzy-headed. I don't—" He paused, searching for words. "I don't want to miss anything." The simple statement hit Ethan with unexpected force. This child facing the end of his short life was trying to remain present for every moment of what little time he had left. It was a courage Ethan wasn't sure he himself possessed. "I understand," he said finally. "But promise me you'll take them when the pain is too much." Nathan nodded. "I promise, sir." Later that night, after Nathan had gone to bed, Ethan sat alone in the main room, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He rarely drank these days, finding that alcohol did little to dull the kind of pain he carried. But tonight, with a dying boy under his roof, a boy whose quiet dignity reminded him so painfully of Joseph, he needed something to steady his nerves. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of settling wood and the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel. Ethan's gaze drifted to the piano that stood silent against the wall. It had been Joseph's pride and joy, a gift for his 10th birthday. The boy had shown a natural talent for music, teaching himself to play with minimal instruction. After Joseph's death, Ethan couldn't bring himself to sell the instrument, but neither could he bear to hear it played. It stood now as a monument to what had been lost. A soft sound from down the hall caught his attention. A muffled cough, followed by the creak of bed springs as Nathan presumably adjusted his position. Ethan found himself wondering what the boy had left behind when his parents died. Had there been a home he loved? Treasured possessions now lost? People who had mattered to him? These thoughts led him to Nathan's room. The door was slightly ajar, and Ethan could see the boy had fallen asleep with a small oil lamp still burning on the bedside table. He moved quietly to extinguish it, not wanting to risk a fire. As he reached for the lamp, his eye caught sight of Nathan's canvas bag on the floor beside the bed. It had fallen open, revealing a small wooden box and what appeared to be a folded piece of paper. Ethan knew he should simply turn out the lamp and leave, but something compelled him to look closer. The box, he discovered, contained pills, the medication Nathan had mentioned. Beside it lay a letter, the paper worn at the creases as if it had been folded and unfolded many times. Ethan hesitated only briefly before picking it up. telling himself he had a right to know more about the child staying in his home. The letter was from Dr. Howard Jenkins at the Denver orphanage, addressed to whom it may concern. It detailed Nathan's condition in clinical terms: a malignant tumor pressing against his spine, inoperable, given current medical knowledge, terminal prognosis, with an estimated 2 to 3 months of life remaining. The doctor recommended palliative care only with laudanum for pain management when necessary. Ethan carefully refolded the letter and returned it to its place, a heaviness settling in his chest. He looked at the sleeping boy so small in the bed, his breathing shallow but steady. In sleep, Nathan's face had lost its careful composure, revealing the child beneath the stoic exterior. As Ethan turned to leave, his foot nudged something under the bed. Bending down, he discovered a small sketchbook. He shouldn't look, he knew that, but curiosity overrode his better judgment. He carefully opened the book, angling it toward the lamplight. What he saw made his blood run cold. The pages contained detailed drawings of his farm: the house, the barn, the old oak tree that stood near the property line, all rendered with remarkable skill for one so young. But it was the accuracy that disturbed him. The drawings showed the farm from various angles, with details that could only have been observed firsthand. Yet these sketches appeared to have been made before Nathan's arrival. The dates in the corner of some pages going back several months. It was as if the boy had seen this place in dreams or in some vision. As if he had known where he was coming to long before Gabriel brought him here. Ethan closed the sketchbook with trembling hands and returned it to its place beneath the bed. He extinguished the lamp and retreated from the room, unsettled by what he had discovered. Back in the main room, he poured himself another measure of whiskey, trying to make sense of what he had seen. Was it possible the boy had visited the farm before? Had Gabriel perhaps brought him here without Ethan's knowledge? Or was there some other explanation, something Ethan's rational mind hesitated to consider? From down the hall came the soft sound of Nathan coughing again, followed by a quiet whimper of pain. Ethan found himself moving before he had consciously decided to returning to the boy's room with a glass of water and a troubled heart. The next few days established a routine of sorts. Nathan would rise early, often before Ethan, and they would share a quiet breakfast before tackling the farm chores. True to his word, Ethan assigned the boy only light tasks, and Nathan, despite his evident desire to do more, accepted these limitations without complaint. In the afternoons, when the summer heat became too intense for outdoor work, they would retreat to the relative coolness of the house. Nathan would read from Joseph's old books, or sit by the window sketching in his book. Ethan found tasks to occupy himself, mending harnesses, repairing tools, tallying accounts, always keeping a discreet eye on the boy. What Ethan observed both impressed and troubled him. Nathan bore his pain with a dignity beyond his years, taking his medication only when absolutely necessary, just as he had said. He approached each day with a quiet enthusiasm, finding joy in simple things: the antics of a squirrel in the yard, the pattern of clouds across the sky, the taste of fresh bread that Ethan baked one morning. It was as if the boy understood, in a way few adults ever did, the preciousness of ordinary moments. And behind it all was the knowledge, unspoken but ever present, that Nathan's moments were finite and dwindling. On the fourth evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Nathan broke their comfortable silence. "Mr. Calloway," he said, his voice soft in the gathering dusk, "may I ask you something?" Ethan nodded, curious what might be on the boy's mind. "The piano inside. Does anyone play it?" The question caught Ethan off guard. The piano had stood untouched for 2 years, gathering dust, like his memories. "No," he answered, his voice rougher than he intended. Not anymore. Nathan seemed to sense the pain behind the brief reply. It's a beautiful instrument, he said carefully. I've never played one, but I've always wanted to learn. Ethan looked at the boy, seeing the longing in his eyes. It would be easy to refuse to keep the piano silent, as it had been since Joseph's death. But something in Nathan's expression, that same quiet acceptance he had shown about his condition, made refusal impossible. You can try it if you'd like. Ethan heard himself say the words surprising him as much as they seemed to surprise Nathan. The boy's face lit up with genuine pleasure. Really, you wouldn't mind? I wouldn't have offered if I minded, Ethan said more gruffly than the situation warranted. They went inside as the last light faded from the sky. Ethan lit the lamps while Nathan approached the piano with reverent steps, as if walking on hallowed ground. The boy carefully lifted the keyboard cover, revealing the yellowed ivory keys beneath. It might be out of tune, Ethan warned, suddenly nervous about the sound that had been absent from his home for so long. Nathan nodded then, with tentative fingers pressed a single key. The note rang out clear and true in the quiet room. The boy pressed another, then another, his face alight with wonder at the sounds he was creating. Ethan stood frozen, memories washing over him. Joseph sitting at this same piano, his small fingers moving confidently across the keys, filling the house with music and life. The pain of remembering was acute, but beneath it was something else, something Ethan had not expected. A bittersweet pleasure in seeing the instrument come alive again, under another child's hands. Nathan had no training, that much was obvious, but he had an instinctive feel for the instrument. He experimented with different combinations of notes, his face intent as he listened to how they sounded together. After a while, he began to pick out a simple melody, something that sounded vaguely familiar to Ethan. "Where did you learn that?" Ethan asked when Nathan paused. The boy looked up, a strange expression crossing his face. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "It just came to me. Like I've heard it before, but I can't remember where." Ethan nodded, not entirely satisfied with the answer, but unwilling to press further. "It's getting late," he said instead. "You should get some rest." Nathan closed the piano lid carefully, his movements as respectful as if he were handling something sacred. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway," he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. That was wonderful." That night, after Nathan had gone to bed, Ethan sat alone in the darkened main room, the echo of the piano notes still hanging in the air. He had expected to feel only pain at hearing the instrument played again, but instead found himself experiencing a complex mixture of emotion. Grief for what was lost? Yes, but also a strange comfort in the knowledge that something of Joseph's passion lived on in this house. He thought again of the drawings in Nathan's sketchbook, of the melody the boy had played, without knowing where he had learned it. There were questions here that Ethan's rational mind couldn't answer, connections he couldn't explain. As he finally rose to seek his own bed, a thought occurred to him. Perhaps Gabriel had been right. Perhaps there was healing to be found here, not just for Nathan in his final days, but for Ethan himself, locked as he had been in his grief for far too long. The notion was unsettling, challenging the walls Ethan had built around his heart since Joseph's death. He pushed it away, unwilling to examine it too closely. Yet, as he drifted toward sleep, the sound of Nathan's simple melody followed him into his dreams, intertwining with memories of Joseph's music in a haunting counterpoint that spoke of both loss and possibility. On the morning of the 5th day, Ethan woke to the sound of Nathan coughing violently. He hurried to the boy's room to find him sitting up in bed, doubled over in pain, his face alarmingly pale. "Nathan," Ethan said, medical training taking precedence over emotional distance, "where does it hurt?" The boy couldn't answer, immediately caught in the grip of another coughing spell. When it finally subsided, he pointed wordlessly to his lower back, the site of the tumor. Ethan helped him lie back, his hands moving with the surety of long practice as he examined the area. The swelling seemed larger than before, the skin over it tighter and more inflamed. When he pressed gently near the tumor, Nathan flinched in pain. "I'm sorry," Ethan murmured, withdrawing his hands. "Have you taken your medicine this morning?" Nathan shook his head weakly. "Didn't want to. Waste it." Ethan felt a surge of frustration at the boy's stoicism. "This is exactly when you should be taking it," he said, reaching for the wooden box on the bedside table. He shook out a pill and helped Nathan sit up enough to swallow it with a sip of water. "Rest now," Ethan instructed, easing the boy back against the pillows. "I'll check on you again soon." As he turned to leave, Nathan caught his sleeve. "Mr. Calloway," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I'm too much trouble, I understand. The Reverend said he'd come back." The implication, that Nathan expected to be sent away because of his illness, struck Ethan like a physical blow. How many times had this child been passed over, rejected, because his condition made him too difficult, too painful to care for? "Nathan," Ethan said firmly, "you're not going anywhere. You're staying right here." Relief washed over the boy's features, followed quickly by exhaustion as the medication began to take effect. His eyelids drooped, and within moments he had drifted into a fitful sleep. Ethan stood watching him for a long moment, troubled by the rapid deterioration in Nathan's condition. Gabriel had said the boy had months to live, but looking at him now, Ethan wasn't sure. And if Nathan's time was shorter than expected, what then? How would Ethan handle watching another child slip away under his care? The thought sent him outside, needing air and distance. He strode across the yard to the barn, where he busied himself with meaningless tasks, trying to outpace his own thoughts. But they followed him relentlessly. Memories of Joseph's decline, the helplessness he had felt as his medical knowledge proved useless against his son's illness, the terrible finality of that last rattling breath. Now, here was Nathan, another boy facing the same inexorable end. And once again, Ethan could do nothing to stop it. Or could he? The thought struck him suddenly. Samuel Fletcher, his former student, now the town doctor. Samuel had continued his medical studies after the war, keeping pace with the latest advancements, while Ethan had retreated to his farm and his grief. Perhaps Samuel would know of treatments Ethan was unaware of, new approaches to tumors like Nathan's. It was a slim hope at best, but it was more than Ethan had allowed himself in a long time. He returned to the house with renewed purpose, checking on Nathan briefly before preparing to ride into town. The boy was still sleeping, his breathing shallow but steady, his face relaxed in the temporary relief provided by the medication. Ethan left a note explaining his absence in case Nathan woke while he was gone. Then, with a last glance at the sleeping child, he set out for town, driving the wagon faster than was his usual habit. Millfield was a small settlement, little more than a main street with a general store, a church, a saloon, and a handful of other businesses serving the surrounding farms and ranches. Dr. Samuel Fletcher's office and residence occupied a modest building near the center of town, marked by a simple sign proclaiming "Doctor" in fading paint. Ethan tied his horse at the hitching post and approached the door with a sense of trepidation. It had been nearly 2 years since he had last spoken to Samuel at Joseph's funeral. The younger man had tried to maintain contact afterwards, stopping by the farm occasionally, but Ethan had rebuffed these efforts until they eventually ceased. He knocked firmly, hearing footsteps approach from within. The door opened to reveal Samuel Fletcher, looking much as Ethan remembered. A man in his mid-30s with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, his dark hair now showing threads of gray at the temples. Recognition followed by surprise crossed Samuel's features. "Dr. Calloway," he said, using the title Ethan had long since abandoned. This is unexpected." "It's just Calloway now, Samuel," Ethan corrected. "Has been for some time." Samuel nodded, accepting the correction without comment. "Please come in," he said, stepping aside to allow Ethan entry. The office was simple but well organized, with a desk examination table and cabinets containing medical supplies. Various medical texts lined a bookshelf along one wall, and anatomical charts hung from another. It was a far cry from the battlefield hospitals where Ethan had taught Samuel the basics of surgery, but he could see his former student had created a respectable practice. "What brings you to town?" Samuel asked, gesturing for Ethan to take a seat. "It's been a while since you've ventured this far from your farm." There was no accusation in the words, just a simple statement of fact. Ethan appreciated the lack of judgment. It was one of the qualities that had made Samuel a good student. "I have a boy staying with me." Ethan began finding it difficult to articulate his concerns. "Reverend Wilson brought him from the Denver orphanage. He's—" Ethan paused, searching for words. "He's very ill." Samuel's expression grew serious. "What are his symptoms?" Ethan described Nathan's condition as clinically as he could. The tumor on his back, the increasing pain, the coughing spells that had begun that morning. As he spoke, he found himself slipping back into the language and manner of a physician, detached and analytical. Samuel listened attentively, asking occasional questions about the size and location of the tumor, the progression of symptoms, the boy's overall constitution. When Ethan had finished, the younger doctor was silent for a moment, considering. "It sounds like the tumor may be pressing on his lung," Samuel said finally. "That would explain the coughing. How long has he had the growth?" "Several months, according to the letter from the orphanage doctor. He gave Nathan a prognosis of 2 to 3 months. That was," Ethan calculated quickly, "about 3 weeks ago." Samuel's expression grew grimmer. "And the orphanage doctor, did he attempt any treatment, surgery perhaps?" Ethan shook his head. "The letter mentioned only palliative care. I suspect they decided the tumor was inoperable. Without examining the boy myself, I can't say for certain," Samuel said cautiously. "But from your description, it sounds like an aggressive malignancy. If it's already affecting his breathing, the prognosis might be even shorter than originally thought." Ethan had expected this answer, but it still hit him hard. "Is there nothing that can be done? No new treatments you've heard of?" Samuel removed his spectacles, pinching the bridge of his nose. A gesture Ethan recognized from their days working together under extreme pressure. "There have been some experimental surgeries attempted in Chicago and New York," he said slowly. "Removal of tumors like the one you describe. But the success rate is low, and the procedure itself is extremely risky." "But it's possible," Ethan pressed, seizing on this sliver of hope. Samuel replaced his spectacles, his expression compassionate but honest. "Possible, yes. But Ethan, even if we could get the boy to Chicago, which would be a difficult journey for someone in his condition, the surgery itself might kill him. And if it didn't, the recovery would be brutal, with no guarantee the cancer wouldn't return." Ethan felt the hope that had brought him to town crumbling. "So we just watch him die," he said bitterly. "Like Joseph." Samuel's eyes softened with understanding. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I truly am. But yes, at this point, making him comfortable is likely the kindest course." He hesitated, then added, I can provide stronger pain medication than what the orphanage doctor might have given him, and I can come out to the farm to examine him if you'd like." Ethan nodded momentarily, unable to speak. He had known rationally that there was little chance of a different outcome, but some part of him had hoped, foolishly, desperately, that Samuel might offer a miracle. "I'd appreciate that," he managed finally. "The medication and your visit." Samuel rose and went to one of his cabinets, returning with a small brown bottle. "This is laudanum," he said, handing it to Ethan. "Stronger than the pills he likely has. Use it when the pain is severe. A few drops in water no more than every 6 hours." Ethan took the bottle, feeling its weight in his palm. Such a small thing to stand between a child and agony. "Thank you, Samuel." As he turned to leave, Samuel spoke again. "Ethan," he said, his voice gentler than before, "you were the finest doctor I ever knew. What happened with Joseph? It wasn't your fault. Some battles can't be won no matter how skilled the physician." The words touched a wound that had never properly healed. Ethan had told himself the same thing countless times, but hearing it from Samuel, who had witnessed firsthand Ethan's abilities as a doctor, carried a different weight. "Perhaps," was all Ethan could bring himself to say. "But it doesn't make watching it happen again any easier." Samuel nodded in understanding. "I'll come out to see the boy tomorrow, if that suits." "Thank you," Ethan said again, and took his leave, the bottle of laudanum secure in his pocket. The return journey to the farm seemed longer than the ride into town had been. Ethan's mind was full of conflicting thoughts and emotions, resignation to Nathan's fate, determination to ease his suffering, and beneath it all, a persistent question. Why had Gabriel brought this particular boy to him? Of all the orphans in Denver, why one whose condition so closely mirrored Joseph's final illness? As the farm came into view, Ethan was struck by how different it looked in the golden afternoon light. Not the neglected property he had allowed it to become over the past 2 years, but the home it had once been. For a moment, he saw it as Nathan might have in those mysterious drawings, a place of refuge, of possibility. The thought stayed with him as he stabled the horse and approached the house, wondering what he would find inside. Would Nathan still be sleeping? Had the medication provided enough relief? Or would Ethan find him suffering alone and afraid in a strange house with a man who had been less than welcoming? He entered quietly, not wanting to wake the boy if he was still resting. The main room was empty, the note Ethan had left untouched on the table. He moved toward the hallway, intending to check Nathan's room, when a sound stopped him. A series of notes from the piano, hesitant at first, then forming a melody. Ethan stood frozen, listening. The tune was simple, but hauntingly beautiful, played with more confidence than Nathan had shown the previous evening. It was familiar somehow, tugging at Ethan's memory, though he couldn't quite place it. He moved silently to the doorway of the main room, looking toward the piano. Nathan sat on the bench, his back to Ethan, his thin frame silhouetted against the afternoon light streaming through the window. The boy's fingers moved over the keys with a natural grace that belied his lack of formal training. As Ethan watched, the melody became more complex, developing into something that sent a chill down his spine. He knew this piece. It was the composition Joseph had been working on before he fell ill, a tune he had played over and over, refining and expanding until his hands became too weak to manage the keys. But Joseph had never completed it. The composition had died with him unfinished and unplayed for 2 years. How could Nathan possibly know it? Ethan must have made some sound. For Nathan turned suddenly, his fingers stilling on the keys. His face pale from illness, flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Calloway," he said hastily, closing the piano lid. "I'm sorry. I know I should have asked before. Where did you learn that piece?" Ethan interrupted, his voice sharper than he intended. Nathan's flush deepened. "I don't know," he admitted. I had a dream about it. I saw someone playing it right here on this piano. A boy, about my age." He hesitated, then added in a small voice, Was it your son?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with implications Ethan wasn't ready to confront. How could Nathan know about Joseph? Had Gabriel told him, or was there some other explanation, something that defied rational understanding? Before Ethan could formulate a response, Nathan was seized by another coughing fit, this one more violent than before. He doubled over on the piano bench, his thin body racked with spasms, one hand pressed against his back where the tumor lay. Medical instinct overrode all other concerns. Ethan was at the boy's side in an instant, supporting him through the coughing spell, noting with alarm the flecks of blood that appeared on Nathan's palm when he covered his mouth. When the coughing finally subsided, Nathan was left weak and trembling. Ethan lifted him easily, too easily, the boy weighing no more than a bundle of sticks, and carried him to his room. He settled Nathan on the bed, propping him up with pillows to ease his breathing. "I'm sorry," Nathan whispered, his voice hoarse from coughing. "I made a mess." "Don't worry about that," Ethan said, reaching for the laudanum Samuel had given him. "This will help with the pain." He administered a few drops in water, helping Nathan drink it slowly. The boy grimaced at the bitter taste, but didn't complain. "Try to rest now," Ethan said, his hand lingering briefly on Nathan's forehead, checking for fever. The skin was warm, but not alarmingly so. Nathan's eyes, already growing heavy from the medication, fixed on Ethan's face. "Was I right?" he asked, his voice slurring slightly. "About the boy at the piano." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Yes," he admitted. "That was Joseph's composition. He was working on it before he died." A strange smile touched Nathan's lips. "I knew it," he murmured, his eyes drifting closed. "He plays beautifully. In my dreams, I mean." Within moments, the boy was asleep, his breathing still labored, but less painful now. Ethan sat beside the bed for a long time, watching the rise and fall of Nathan's chest, his mind struggling to make sense of what he had witnessed. The rational part of him, the doctor, the man of science, insisted there must be a logical explanation. Perhaps Gabriel had indeed told Nathan about Joseph had described the unfinished composition. Perhaps the boy had overheard the melody somewhere else and incorporated it into his dreams. But another part of Ethan, a part he had long suppressed, wondered if there might be connections in this world that science couldn't explain. Connections between souls, between hearts that had known similar pain. Between a father who had lost a son and a son who had never known a father. As the light outside began to fade, casting the room in deepening shadows, Ethan finally rose from Nathan's bedside. Whatever the explanation for the boy's knowledge of Joseph's music, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Nathan's time was running out even faster than expected. The blood in his cough was an ominous sign suggesting the tumor might be invading his lung. And Ethan, who had failed to save his own son, now faced the prospect of watching another boy slip away. But this time, he resolved Nathan would not face death alone and afraid. This time, Ethan would be present, fully, completely present, for whatever time remained. It was a commitment that terrified him, opening wounds he had spent 2 years trying to numb. But as he looked at Nathan's sleeping form so vulnerable in the gathering darkness, Ethan knew he could do nothing less. He lit the small lamp on the bedside table, adjusting it so the light wouldn't disturb the boy. Then, pulling the chair closer to the bed, he settled in for the night watch, prepared to be there when Nathan woke, whether it was in pain, in fear, or simply in need of reassurance that he was not alone. Outside the window, The first stars appeared in the darkening sky, silent witnesses to the quiet vigil of a man who had closed his heart to the world, now opening it once more to a dying child who had somehow found his way home. Dawn broke over the Colorado hills, painting the sky in delicate shades of pink and gold. Ethan Calloway stood at the window of Nathan's room, watching the sunrise while the boy slept fitfully. He had remained at Nathan's bedside through the night, dozing occasionally in the chair, but waking at every sound of distress from the child. The laudanum had provided relief for several hours, but as its effects waned, Nathan's pain had returned, manifesting in small whimpers and restless movements. Ethan had administered another dose just before midnight, carefully measuring the drops with hands that had once performed the most delicate of surgeries. Now, as the first rays of sunlight spilled across the floor, Ethan turned back to look at Nathan. The boy's face was paler than it had been the day before, with dark shadows beneath his eyes, speaking of pain, even in sleep. The flecks of blood in his cough were a worrying sign, one that Ethan, with his medical background, understood all too well. As if sensing Ethan's gaze, Nathan's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion clouded his features, then recognition dawned. "Mr. Calloway," his voice was a raspy whisper. "Have you been here all night?" Ethan moved to the bedside, his expression softening. "How are you feeling this morning?" Nathan considered the question with a seriousness beyond his years. "Better than yesterday," he said, though the tightness around his eyes suggested otherwise. Did I dream about playing the piano?" "No," Ethan replied quietly. "That was real. You played a piece that—" He paused, still uncertain how to address what had happened. "A piece that my son was composing before he died." Nathan's eyes widened slightly. "I'm sorry if I upset you. I didn't know it was his. In my dreams, I just saw someone playing it, a boy with light hair sitting at your piano." Ethan felt a chill at the description. Joseph had indeed had fair hair lighter than Nathan's sandy brown. "You've been dreaming about my son." Nathan nodded, his expression earnest. "For months now, even before Reverend Wilson brought me here. I dream about this house, about the farm, and about him playing the piano." He hesitated, then added softly, "He looks happy when he plays." Ethan sank into the chair beside the bed, struggling to process what he was hearing. "Nathan," he said carefully, "how could you know these things about Joseph, about this place?" The boy shook his head. "I don't know. The dreams started after my mother died. At first I thought it was just my imagination making up a nice place where I might go someday." His gaze traveled around the small room. "But when we arrived here, I recognized everything. The house, the barn, the tree by the fence. It was exactly like my dreams." There was no deception in Nathan's eyes, only genuine puzzlement at his own experiences. Ethan found himself at a loss for words. As a doctor, he had always relied on science, on what could be observed and measured. But these dreams, this knowledge that Nathan couldn't possibly possess, defied rational explanation. Before he could formulate a response, Nathan was seized by another coughing fit. Ethan quickly helped him sit up, supporting his thin shoulders as the spasms racked his body. When the coughing subsided, fresh blood stained Nathan's lips. Ethan reached for a clean cloth, gently wiping away the blood. "I've arranged for Dr. Fletcher to visit today," he said, his tone deliberately calm despite his growing concern. "He's a good doctor. He'll help with the pain." Nathan nodded weakly, too exhausted to speak. Ethan eased him back against the pillows, noting how the boy's breathing seemed more labored than the day before. "Try to rest," he said. I'll bring you some breakfast shortly." Nathan's eyes were already closing, the brief conversation having depleted what little energy he had. Ethan watched him for a moment longer, then quietly left the room, his mind churning with questions for which he had no answers. In the kitchen, Ethan mechanically prepared a simple breakfast, oatmeal with honey, easy for Nathan to eat if he felt up to it. As he worked, his thoughts returned to the impossible knowledge Nathan possessed. The boy had somehow dreamed of Joseph, of this house, long before he arrived here. What could it mean Ethan had never been a particularly religious man, despite his friendship with Gabriel? The horrors he had witnessed during the war had challenged whatever faith he might once have had. But now, faced with something he couldn't explain through science or reason, he found himself wondering if there might be forces at work beyond his understanding. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Wiping his hands on a towel, Ethan went to answer it, relieved to see Samuel Fletcher standing on his porch, medical bag in hand. "Samuel," Ethan greeted him. "Thank you for coming so quickly." The younger doctor nodded, his expression serious. "How is the boy this morning?" "Not good," Ethan admitted, leading Samuel inside. "He's coughing blood now, and his breathing is labored." Samuel's face grew grave. "The tumor may be pressing on his lung, as we suspected." He removed his hat, setting it aside. "I'd like to examine him right away." Ethan led the way to Nathan's room, where the boy had drifted back to sleep. He stirred at their entrance, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of the unfamiliar doctor. "Nathan," Ethan said gently, "this is Dr. Fletcher. He's here to help with the pain." Samuel approached the bedside with the calm confidence that Ethan had always admired in him. "Hello, Nathan," he said, his voice kind. "I understand you've been having a rough time lately." Nathan nodded, his wary gaze moving between Samuel and Ethan. "It's all right," Ethan reassured him. "Dr. Fletcher is an old friend. He was once my student, in fact." Surprise flickered across Nathan's face. "You were a doctor, Mr. Calloway." The question, so innocent and direct, caught Ethan off guard. He had not spoken of his former profession to Nathan yet. Somehow it seemed right that the boy should know. "Yes," he acknowledged. "A long time ago." Samuel glanced at Ethan, a question in his eyes, but focused his attention on Nathan. "I'm going to examine you now, if that's all right," he said. "I'll try to be gentle, but you must tell me if anything hurts." Nathan nodded his consent, and Samuel began his examination. He listened to the boy's chest with his stethoscope, checked his pulse, and carefully examined the tumor on his back. Throughout, Nathan remained stoic, though his face paled when Samuel palpated the area around the growth. When the examination was complete, Samuel helped Nathan back into a comfortable position. "You're being very brave," he told the boy. "I'm going to speak with Mr. Calloway now, and then we'll discuss how to make you more comfortable." Nathan nodded, his exhaustion evident. Ethan tucked the blanket around him, promising to return soon, then followed Samuel out into the hallway. Once they were out of earshot, Samuel's professional demeanor gave way to genuine concern. "The situation is worse than I expected," he said quietly. "The tumor is larger than you described, and it's definitely affecting his lung function. I'm surprised he's still able to sit up at all, given the pressure it must be placing on his spine." Ethan had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed still sent a wave of dread through him. "How long?" he asked, the question familiar and painful. Samuel removed his spectacles, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Weeks at most, Ethan. Perhaps only days, if the lung involvement progresses rapidly." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the prognosis. "And the pain?" "I've brought stronger medication," Samuel said, reaching into his bag. "Morphine. It will provide better relief than the laudanum, especially as the pain increases." He handed Ethan a small bottle with a dropper. 2 drops in water no more than every 4 hours. It will make him very drowsy, but at this stage, sleep is a mercy. Ethan took the bottle, feeling its weight in his palm, the substance within both a blessing and a harbinger of the end. "Thank you, Samuel." Samuel replaced his spectacles, studying Ethan with a professional eye. "You look exhausted. Have you slept at all?" "Enough," Ethan replied dismissively. Samuel's expression softened. "Ethan, if you're going to care for him through this, you must take care of yourself as well." And he hesitated, then added, "I didn't realize you had told him you were a doctor." "I hadn't," Ethan admitted. "But the boy, he seems to know things he shouldn't possibly know." He shook his head, unwilling to elaborate further. "It doesn't matter now." Samuel looked as if he wanted to pursue the subject, but instead asked, "Would you like me to explain his condition to him? Children often understand more than we give them credit for, and knowing what to expect can sometimes ease their fears." Ethan considered the offer. Nathan had shown a remarkable maturity about his illness thus far, facing it with a courage that humbled Ethan. "Yes," he decided, "but let me be present. He should know he's not alone in this." They returned to Nathan's room to find the boy awake, his gaze fixed on the window where a robin had perched on the sill outside. He turned as they entered, a ghost of a smile crossing his pale features. "The birds here sing differently than in Denver," he observed. "Sweeter somehow." The simple observation made in the face of such suffering struck Ethan deeply. This child, with so little time left, was still finding beauty in the world around him. Samuel pulled a chair close to the bedside, sitting so that he was at eye level with Nathan. "I'd like to talk to you about what's happening with your body," he said, his tone gentle but straightforward. "Is that all right?" Nathan nodded, his expression solemn. "It's getting worse, isn't it?" Samuel did not sugarcoat the truth. "Yes, it is. The growth on your back is pressing against your lung, which is why you're coughing and finding it harder to breathe." Nathan absorbed this information with remarkable calm. "Am I going to die soon?" The direct question hung in the air. Ethan, standing at the foot of the bed, felt his throat tighten with emotion. Samuel met Nathan's gaze steadily. "Yes, Nathan. I believe you are. I'm very sorry." Nathan was quiet for a moment, processing this confirmation of what he had likely already suspected. "How long do I have?" he finally asked. "It's difficult to say exactly," Samuel replied, "but likely not very long. Weeks, perhaps." Nathan nodded, his face thoughtful rather than fearful. "Thank you for telling me the truth," he said simply. Samuel reached out, placing a gentle hand on Nathan's. "We're going to make sure you're not in pain," he promised, "and you won't be alone." Nathan's eyes moved to Ethan, a question in them that he didn't voice aloud. Ethan found himself moving to the bedside, surprising himself as much as Nathan when he took the boy's other hand. "You'll stay here," Ethan said firmly. "This is your home now for as long as you need it." Relief washed over Nathan's features, followed by a gratitude so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway," he whispered. After giving Nathan his first dose of the morphine, they left him to rest the medication, quickly drawing him into a deep sleep. In the main room, Samuel gave Ethan additional instructions for Nathan's care, promising to return in a few days to check on the boy's condition. As Samuel prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "You're doing a good thing, Ethan," he said quietly. "That boy would be facing this alone if not for you." Ethan shook his head. "I'm doing what anyone would do." "No," Samuel countered. "You're not. Most people would have sent him back to the orphanage at the first sign of serious illness. You're giving him a home, a place to—" He trailed off, unwilling to say the words. "A place to die," Ethan finished for him, his voice rough. "As if that's some great kindness." Samuel studied him for a moment. "It is, Ethan. Perhaps the greatest kindness of all." After Samuel's departure, Ethan returned to Nathan's room, settling into the chair beside the bed. The boy slept peacefully now, the morphine granting him temporary reprieve from his pain. In sleep, with his face relaxed and his breathing steady, Nathan looked younger, more vulnerable. A child who should have had years ahead of him, not days. Ethan found himself thinking of Joseph, of the similar vigil he had kept by his son's bedside. The parallels were undeniable. Yet there was something different about this time. With Joseph, Ethan had railed against fate, had exhausted himself, trying every possible treatment, refusing to accept the inevitable until the very end. With Nathan, there was a strange sort of acceptance from the beginning. Not a surrender, but an acknowledgement of what was to come, paired with a determination to make the boy's remaining time as peaceful as possible. Perhaps Ethan reflected this was what healing looked like, not a return to what had been before, but a new way of carrying the pain, one that allowed for both grief and grace. The days that followed established a new routine. Nathan's condition continued to deteriorate, but slowly enough that he still had periods of wakefulness and relative comfort between doses of morphine. During these times, Ethan would read to him from Joseph's old books, help him to the window so he could watch the activities of the farm, or simply sit with him, sometimes talking, sometimes sharing a companionable silence. On the third day after Samuel's visit, Nathan asked a question that had clearly been on his mind. "Mr. Calloway," he began, his voice weaker than before, but still clear. "Would you tell me about being a doctor during the war, I mean?" Ethan was surprised by the request. He rarely spoke of those days, of the horrors he had witnessed, and the lives he had tried to save in the chaos of battle. But looking at Nathan's earnest face, he found himself unable to refuse. "It was difficult," he began, choosing his words carefully. "There were so many wounded, and so little we could do for many of them with the medicine we had then." "But you helped people," Nathan said. "You saved lives." Ethan nodded slowly. "Some, yes. Not as many as I would have liked." "Is that why you stopped, because of the ones you couldn't save?" The question struck at the heart of a truth Ethan had never fully articulated even to himself. "Partly," he admitted. "After seeing so much death, I thought I could leave it behind by coming here, by focusing on creating life through the land instead." "But then your son got sick," Nathan said softly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Yes." Ethan said the word barely audible. "And all my knowledge, all my training couldn't save him." Nathan was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "Do you think," he asked hesitantly, "that's why I'm here? So you can make peace with that?" The question was so unexpected, so insightful, that Ethan found himself momentarily speechless. This child facing his own mortality was somehow able to see connections that Ethan himself had been blind to. "I don't know, Nathan," he answered honestly, "but I'm beginning to think nothing happens entirely by chance." Nathan smiled at that, a genuine smile that lit his thin face. "In my dreams," he said, "the boy at the piano, Joseph, he's trying to finish his song, but he can't quite get the ending right. I think that's why I'm here, to help him finish it." The statement should have seemed nonsensical, the product of a child's imagination or the morphine's influence. But something in Nathan's tone, in the certainty with which he spoke, gave Ethan pause. "Would you like to try?" he found himself asking. "To play the piano again, I mean." Nathan's eyes brightened. "Could I? I'm not sure I can walk that far today." I could carry you, Ethan offered, surprising himself with the suggestion. If you'd like. The joy that spread across Nathan's face was answer enough. With careful movements, Ethan lifted the boy from the bed, alarmed at how light he had become in just these few days. Nathan's arms went around his neck, his body trembling slightly with weakness, but his expression eager. Ethan carried him to the main room, settling him gently on the piano bench. Nathan's fingers, thinner now but still nimble, caressed the keys with reverence before beginning to play. The melody that emerged was Joseph's composition, but as Nathan continued, the music evolved, moving beyond the point where Joseph had always stopped, developing into something new yet harmonious with what had come before. Ethan stood transfixed, listening to the music that somehow bridged the gap between his past and present, between the son he had lost and the boy who had inexplicably found his way to this farm. The piece was beautiful in its simplicity, yet profound in its emotional resonance. A song of loss, yes, but also of connection, of the bonds that transcended understanding. When Nathan finally stopped playing, his strength exhausted, he looked up at Ethan with tears in his eyes. "I think that's it," he said softly. "That's how it's supposed to end." Ethan could only nod, his own eyes damp with tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. "It's beautiful, Nathan," he managed to say, "truly beautiful." As he carried the boy back to his room, Ethan felt something shift within himself, a loosening of the tight knot of grief that had bound his heart for 2 long years. It wasn't gone, would never be gone entirely, but it had transformed into something that could coexist with moments of beauty, of connection, even of joy. That evening, after Nathan had taken his medication and drifted into sleep, Ethan sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of amber and gold. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew his attention to the road, where he saw a familiar figure on horseback. Gabriel Wilson. The Reverend dismounted at the hitching post, his expression a mixture of concern and inquiry as he approached the porch. "Ethan," he greeted. "I hope I'm not intruding." Ethan shook his head, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. "Not at all. I've been expecting you." Gabriel settled into the chair with a sigh of relief. "I would have come sooner, but I was called away to a family in need in the next county." His eyes searched Ethan's face. "How is Nathan?" "Dying," Ethan said simply. "The tumor is affecting his lung now. Dr. Fletcher says it's a matter of weeks, perhaps less." Gabriel's face fell. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. When I brought him here, I had hoped that there would be more time." Ethan finished for him. "So did I." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle creaking of the porch swing and the distant call of a whippoorwill. "Gabriel," Ethan said finally, "there's something I need to ask you. About Nathan." The Reverend turned to him, attentive. "Of course. Did you tell him about Joseph, about the piano, about the music he composed?" Gabriel's brow furrowed in confusion. "No, I didn't mention Joseph at all. I told Nathan only that you lived alone and might welcome some company. Why do you ask?" Ethan hesitated, uncertain how to explain what had happened without sounding like a man who had lost his grip on reality. "Nathan knows things," he said finally, "about this place, about Joseph, things he couldn't possibly know." Gabriel leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. "What kind of things?" Ethan described the drawings in Nathan's sketchbook, the way he had recognized the farm on arrival, and most significantly, how he had played Joseph's unfinished composition, even adding an ending that seemed perfectly in keeping with the original. Gabriel listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful rather than skeptical. When Ethan had finished, the Reverend was quiet for a long moment. "There are mysteries in this world," that defy easy explanation, Ethan, he said finally. As a man of faith, I believe there are connections between souls that transcend our understanding. You think there's some kind of spiritual connection between Nathan and Joseph? Ethan asked, the concept foreign to his scientifically trained mind. Gabriel smiled gently. I think God works in ways we cannot always comprehend. Perhaps Nathan was sent here not just for his own sake, but for yours as well. A chance for healing for both of you. Ethan considered this perspective, finding it simultaneously unsettling and oddly comforting. He said something similar himself, he admitted, that he was here to help Joseph finish his song. Gabriel's eyes widened slightly. Out of the mouths of babes, he murmured. Children often see truths that we adults, with all our preconceptions, miss entirely. The conversation shifted then to practical matters. Nathan's care, his medication, the arrangements that would eventually need to be made. Gabriel offered to stay at the farm for a while to help, but Ethan declined, assuring him that he was managing well enough. I'll return in a few days, Gabriel promised as he prepared to leave. But send word if you need me sooner. After the Reverend's departure, Ethan checked on Nathan once more before retiring to his own room. The boy slept peacefully, his breathing labored but steady, his face relaxed in the morphine's embrace. Ethan adjusted the blanket, then impulsively brushed a strand of hair from Nathan's forehead, a tender gesture he had not allowed himself until now. That night, for the first time since Nathan's arrival, Ethan slept deeply without the nightmares that had plagued him since Joseph's death. He dreamed, instead of music, of a melody that wove together joy and sorrow in a tapestry of sound that spoke of life's fragility and beauty. The following days brought visitors to the farm, a development that would have been unwelcome to Ethan just weeks before. Martha Simmons, the widow who lived on the neighboring farm, arrived first, her arms laden with fresh bread and a pot of chicken soup. Samuel Fletcher mentioned the boy was ill, she explained, her kind face creased with concern. I thought you might appreciate some home cooking. Ethan accepted the offerings with genuine gratitude. Martha had lost her own son to consumption the year before Joseph died, and though they had rarely spoken since then, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared knowledge of what it meant to watch a child slip away. Would you like to meet him? Ethan found himself asking. Nathan, I mean. He's having a good morning. Martha's face softened. I'd like that very much. Nathan was sitting up in bed when they entered a sketchbook propped against his knees. He looked up with curious eyes as Ethan introduced Martha. Mrs. Simmons has brought us some soup, Ethan explained. She's our neighbor to the east. It's nice to meet you, ma'am, Nathan said, his manners impeccable despite his illness. Thank you for the soup. Martha approached the bedside, her gaze taking in the boy's thin frame and pale complexion with the knowing eye of someone who had tended the sick. It's nice to meet you too, Nathan, she said warmly. Perhaps you'd like a bowl while it's hot. Nathan nodded eagerly, and Ethan left them briefly to prepare the soup. When he returned, he found Martha seated beside the bed, examining Nathan's sketchbook with evident admiration. These are remarkable, she was saying, turning the pages carefully. You have a real gift. Nathan smiled, pleased by the praise. Thank you. Drawing helps me remember places and people. This is our farm, Ethan noted, setting the soup tray across Nathan's lap. He recognized the scene, the house viewed from the hill where Joseph was buried, rendered with surprising accuracy. I drew it this morning from memory, Nathan explained. I wanted to remember how the light looks early in the day, how it makes everything golden. The simple observation, the appreciation for beauty that most adults overlooked, touched both Ethan and Martha deeply. They exchanged a glance over Nathan's head, a silent acknowledgement of the wisdom often found in those whose time is limited. Martha stayed for an hour, her gentle presence bringing a warmth to the sick room that had been absent before. She spoke to Nathan about her garden, about the family of rabbits that had taken up residence beneath her porch, about small, everyday things that made the boy smile. When she rose to leave, she promised to return the following day. "She's nice," Nathan said after she had gone. "She has sad eyes, though, like yours." Ethan nodded, struck again by the boy's perceptiveness. Her son died last year. Consumption. The same illness that took Joseph. Nathan absorbed this information thoughtfully. "That's why she understands," he said. "About me, I mean. She doesn't look at me like I'm already gone." The observation was so accurate, so insightful, that Ethan could only nod in agreement. Martha had indeed treated Nathan as a living child, not as someone already half in the grave, just as Ethan himself was learning to do. Martha's visit was followed by others. Samuel Fletcher returning to check on Nathan's condition, the pastor from the local church offering prayers and companionship, even families from town who had heard about the orphan boy staying at the Calloway farm. Each visitor brought something: food, books, small gifts to brighten Nathan's days. Ethan, who had isolated himself so completely after Joseph's death, found these intrusions into his solitude surprisingly welcome. Each visitor seemed to bring a piece of the world back into his home, reminding him of the community that had always existed around him had he only been willing to see it. But most significant were the quiet evenings when it was just the two of them, Ethan and Nathan, sharing stories as the light faded from the sky. Ethan found himself speaking of things he had not discussed in years: his childhood in Pennsylvania, his decision to become a doctor, the horrors and occasional triumphs of his wartime service, his love for his late wife, and yes, stories of Joseph. "He sounds like someone I would have liked to know," Nathan said one evening, after Ethan had recounted a story about Joseph's first successful fishing expedition. "I think we would have been friends." "I think so too," Ethan agreed, surprised to find that the thought brought comfort rather than pain. In return, Nathan shared his own stories of his mother, a kind but frail woman who had taught him to read and write before her illness overtook her, of the small farm where they had lived before her death, of his time at the orphanage where he had been largely overlooked due to his quiet nature. "My mother used to say that still waters run deep," he told Ethan. "That just because someone is quiet doesn't mean they don't have a lot going on inside." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Ethan observed. Nathan nodded, his expression momentarily distant with memory. "She was. She used to tell me that life isn't measured by how many breaths you take, but by how many moments take your breath away." A small smile touched his lips. "I think she would be happy that I'm here with you. This is a good place to find those moments." The simple statement, delivered with such sincere conviction, brought a lump to Ethan's throat. This child, facing the end of his life with a courage that humbled Ethan, was still finding joy in each day, still creating memories to treasure in whatever time remained to him. It was a lesson Ethan had forgotten in his grief, that life, however long or short, was meant to be lived fully, with attention to the beauty and wonder that existed alongside the pain. As August gave way to September, Nathan's condition worsened more rapidly. The periods when he was alert and relatively comfortable grew shorter, while the hours of pain and labored breathing lengthened. Samuel visited more frequently now, adjusting the morphine dosage and providing what comfort medical science could offer. During one such visit, while Nathan slept under the influence of his medication, Samuel took Ethan aside for a frank discussion. "It won't be long now," he said quietly. "Days at most. His lung function is severely compromised, and his body is beginning to shut down." Ethan nodded, having observed the signs himself. The bluish tinge to Nathan's lips and fingernails, the increasing difficulty he had staying awake, the way his skin had taken on a translucent quality, as if he were already becoming something less substantial than flesh. "Is he suffering?" Ethan asked the question that concerned him most. Samuel considered carefully before answering. "With the morphine, the physical pain is controlled. As for the rest," he sighed, "Nathan is more at peace than many adults I've seen facing death. I believe he has accepted what's coming in a way that is quite remarkable for a child his age." This aligned with Ethan's own observations. Even as his body failed him, Nathan maintained a serenity that seemed to transcend his years and circumstances. He rarely complained, and when he did speak of his condition, it was with a matter-of-factness that suggested he had made his peace with it long ago. After Samuel left, Ethan sat beside Nathan's bed, watching the boy's labored breathing. The room was quiet, save for the ticking of the small clock on the bedside table and the occasional rustle of the curtains in the breeze from the partially open window. Nathan stirred his eyes, opening slowly to focus on Ethan's face. "Mr. Calloway," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Ethan leaned closer. "I'm here, Nathan." "Could we go outside?" the boy asked. "Just for a little while, I'd like to see the stars." The request tugged at Ethan's heart. He glanced out the window at the darkening sky, considering whether such an excursion was wise, given Nathan's weakened state. "Please," Nathan added, seeing his hesitation. "It's important." Something in the boy's tone convinced Ethan. "All right," he agreed, "but only for a short time, and you'll be bundled up warmly." Nathan's face brightened with a smile that transformed his gaunt features. "Thank you." With gentle care, Ethan wrapped Nathan in a blanket and lifted him easily into his arms. The boy weighed almost nothing now, his body having consumed itself in its fight against the disease. Yet his eyes were clear and alert as Ethan carried him through the house and out onto the porch. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of late summer flowers and distant rain. Above the sky was a vast canopy of deepening blue, with the first stars beginning to appear in the east. "There," Nathan said, pointing to a bench at the edge of the porch. "We can see better from there." Ethan settled them on the bench, arranging Nathan so that he was cradled against his chest, supported by Ethan's arm. The boy's head rested against Ethan's shoulder, his gaze fixed on the emerging stars. "My mother used to say that stars are windows in heaven," Nathan said softly. "That when someone you love dies, they open a window so they can look down and watch over you." Ethan followed the boy's gaze upward. "It's a comforting thought," he admitted. "Do you think Joseph has a window?" Nathan asked. The question might have pained Ethan once, but now it brought a strange sort of peace. "I'd like to think so," he said. "And perhaps your mother does too." Nathan nodded, satisfied with this answer. They sat in companionable silence as more stars appeared, pinpricks of light in the deepening darkness. The moon rose nearly full, casting a silver glow over the farmyard. "Mr. Calloway," Nathan said after a time, his voice thoughtful. "I'm not afraid anymore." Ethan looked down at the boy in his arms. "Of dying, you mean?" Nathan nodded. "I used to be. At the orphanage, I was so scared of dying alone, with no one who cared. But now—" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Now I think it might be like going home. Like in my dreams, where everything is peaceful and beautiful." Ethan felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Nathan," he said, finding it difficult to speak, "I want you to know something. These past weeks, having you here, it's meant a great deal to me." The boy looked up at him, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Even though I'm dying?" "Especially because of that," Ethan admitted. "You've shown me how to live again, Nathan. How to find beauty and meaning even in the midst of loss." A smile spread across Nathan's pale face, a smile of such genuine happiness that it transformed his features, making him look for a moment like any healthy child receiving praise from a beloved adult. "Mr. Calloway," he said hesitantly, "could I ask you something?" "Anything," Ethan replied. "Would it be all right if I called you Dad?" The question was asked with such vulnerability, such hope, that it pierced Ethan to his core. "Just for the time I have left. I've never had a father, and you've been so kind to me." Ethan could not have refused if he tried. "I would be honored, Nathan," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Truly honored." The joy that illuminated the boy's face was worth any pain that might come later. "Thank you, Dad," he said, testing the word as if it were a precious gift. They remained on the porch until Nathan began to shiver slightly, despite the mild air and the blanket wrapped around him. Ethan carried him back inside, settling him once more in his bed with careful hands. "Would you like some water?" he asked, noting how Nathan's breathing had become more labored from even this brief excursion. Nathan shook his head. "No, thank you. But would you stay until I fall asleep?" "Of course," Ethan said, settling into the chair beside the bed. He reached out, taking Nathan's thin hand in his own larger one. "I'll be right here." Nathan's eyes, already heavy with exhaustion, began to close. "Dad," he murmured, the words slurring slightly as sleep began to claim him. "I'm glad I found you." "I'm glad too, son," Ethan whispered, the endearment coming naturally now. "Rest easy. I'll be here when you wake." As Nathan drifted into sleep, his breathing settling into a shallow rhythm, Ethan continued to hold his hand, a silent promise of presence through whatever might come. Outside, the stars multiplied across the night sky, silent witnesses to the covenant being forged between a man who had lost a son and a boy who had found at last a father. In that quiet room, with the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows on the wall, something profound had shifted. Ethan Calloway, who had closed his heart to the world after Joseph's death, had opened it once more. Not despite the knowledge that he would lose Nathan too, but because of it. Because some connections he was beginning to understand transcended even death itself. The following morning brought a change in Nathan's condition that Ethan, with his medical training, recognized immediately. The boy's breathing had become more shallow and irregular. His skin had taken on a waxy pallor, and though his eyes opened occasionally, they seemed to look beyond the room, focusing on something only he could see. Samuel Fletcher, summoned by a farmhand Ethan had sent to town, confirmed what Ethan already knew. "It's the final stage," he said quietly, after examining Nathan. "His body is shutting down." "How long?" Ethan asked, the question familiar yet never easier to ask or hear answered. "Hours," Samuel replied gently. "Perhaps a day at most." Ethan nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. "Is there anything more we can do for him?" "Keep him comfortable," Samuel advised. "Speak to him even if he seems unresponsive. Hearing is often the last sense to go." He placed a compassionate hand on Ethan's shoulder. "And remember, Ethan, he is not alone. That is the greatest gift you could have given him." After Samuel left, promising to return later, Ethan sent word to Gabriel and Martha. Then he took up his position beside Nathan's bed, determined that the boy would not face a single moment of his final journey without someone at his side. Martha arrived first, her face solemn but composed. She took one look at Nathan and understood immediately, having watched her own son make this same transition. Without a word, she set about making the sick room more comfortable, adjusting the pillows, dampening a cloth to moisten Nathan's dry lips, opening the window slightly to allow fresh air to circulate. "Talk to him," she encouraged Ethan. "Tell him stories, remind him of happy times. It helps them let go peacefully." And so Ethan began to speak, his voice low and steady, telling Nathan about the farm in different seasons, how the fields looked blanketed in snow, how the wildflowers carpeted the hills in spring, how the harvest moon hung heavy and golden in the autumn sky. He described the foals that would be born next spring, the improvements he planned to make to the barn, the new piano music he would order from Denver. He spoke as if Nathan had all the time in the world to witness these things, as if the future stretched endlessly before them. It was a fiction, but a merciful one. A tapestry of possibilities woven with words, a gift of imagination, when reality offered only endings. Gabriel arrived in the afternoon, bringing with him a quiet strength and the comfort of faith. He sat opposite Ethan, adding his own gentle voice to the vigil, sometimes speaking, sometimes offering prayers, always maintaining the circle of care around the dying child. As the day waned and evening approached, Nathan stirred his eyes, opening with surprising clarity. "Dad?" He called, his voice a mere whisper. Ethan leaned close. "I'm here, Nathan." The boy's gaze found his focusing with an effort. "The music," he murmured. "I can hear it now. So beautiful." Ethan stroked Nathan's hair gently. "What music, son? Joseph's song," Nathan breathed. "It's complete now. Perfect." A smile touched his lips. "He's waiting for me." A chill ran through Ethan, not of fear, but of wonder. Martha and Gabriel exchanged glances, but said nothing, respecting the sacred nature of this moment between Ethan and the boy who had become, in these few short weeks, truly his son. "Tell him," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "Tell him his father loves him, both of you." Nathan's smile widened slightly. "He knows," he whispered. "We both do." His eyes drifted closed, then his breathing becoming more irregular. Ethan continued to stroke his hair, to speak softly to him, to assure him that he was loved, that he was not alone, that it was all right to let go when he was ready. As the sun set, painting the room in hues of gold and amber, Nathan drew one final shuddering breath. Then, with a gentle sigh, he was gone. His face relaxed in an expression of peace that spoke of release rather than loss. Ethan sat motionless, still holding the boy's hand, aware of Martha's quiet tears and Gabriel's murmured prayer, but focused entirely on the child before him. In death, Nathan looked younger, the strain of illness erased from his features, leaving only the innocent face of a boy who had in his brief time taught Ethan more about living than he had learned in all his years before. "Goodbye, son," Ethan whispered, bending to place a kiss on Nathan's forehead. "Thank you for finding me." Outside, the first star appeared in the darkening sky, a single point of light in the vast expanse. A window opened in heaven, through which perhaps a boy with sandy hair and wise eyes beyond his years now gazed down upon the farm he had come to call home. The morning after Nathan's passing dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect September day that seemed a cruel contrast to the grief that hung over the Callaway farm. Ethan stood on the porch, coffee cup cooling in his hand, watching as the sun rose over the eastern hills, gilding the landscape in shades of amber and gold. Inside the house, Gabriel and Martha were preparing Nathan's body, a task Ethan had been unable to face. Though he had witnessed countless deaths during his time as a doctor, had prepared many bodies for burial, this was different. This was Nathan, the boy who had, in the space of a few short weeks, become the son of his heart. The sound of wheels on the gravel drive drew his attention. Samuel Fletcher was returning as promised, though his services as a doctor were no longer needed. Ethan watched as he tied his horse to the post and approached the porch, his face solemn with shared sorrow. "Ethan," Samuel greeted him quietly. "I just heard from Martha's son when I passed their farm. I'm so sorry." Ethan nodded, unable to find words adequate to express the complex emotions churning within him. Grief, yes, but also a strange sense of peace, of rightness, as if Nathan's journey had reached its proper conclusion, however painful the ending might be for those left behind. "He went peacefully," Ethan said finally. "In the evening, just as the sun was setting, he spoke of hearing music, Joseph's music." Samuel's expression reflected compassion rather than skepticism. "The dying often speak of such things," he said gently. "Hearing music, seeing loved ones who have gone before. It seems to bring them comfort in their final moments." Ethan considered this, remembering the smile that had touched Nathan's lips as he described hearing the completed song the way he had spoken of Joseph waiting for him. "Yes," he agreed. He seemed ready, at peace with it. They stood in silence for a moment, two men who had seen more than their share of death, yet still found themselves humbled by its mystery. "I've brought the certificate," Samuel said, eventually referring to the death certificate he would need to complete as the attending physician. "And I took the liberty of speaking with Mr. Jensen at the funeral home. He can come out this afternoon if that suits." The practicalities of death, the paperwork, the arrangements, the decisions that must be made, even in the midst of grief. Ethan was grateful for Samuel's foresight, for the quiet efficiency with which he handled these necessary tasks. "Thank you," he said. "That would be fine." As Samuel moved past him into the house, Ethan remained on the porch, his gaze drawn to the hill where Joseph was buried. It was there he had decided that Nathan would rest as well, beside the boy whose unfinished song he had somehow completed, overlooking the farm that had been his home for too brief a time. The day passed in a blur of quiet activity. Mr. Jensen came with his assistant to collect Nathan's body, treating it with a dignity and respect that Ethan appreciated. Martha remained preparing food that no one particularly wanted to eat, but that provided a semblance of normalcy in a day that felt anything but normal. Gabriel met with the carpenter who would craft the small coffin, discussing the details in low tones that spared Ethan the necessity of making these decisions himself. And through it all, Ethan moved as if in a dream, responding when spoken to, nodding at appropriate moments, but largely lost in his own thoughts. He found himself in Nathan's room, standing amid the few possessions the boy had brought with him. The canvas bag, the wooden box of medicine, no longer needed the sketchbook filled with drawings of the farm and its surroundings. Picking up the sketchbook, Ethan settled onto the bed that still held the imprint of Nathan's slight form. He turned the pages, slowly tracing with his fingertips the lines Nathan had drawn. The house viewed from different angles, the barn with its weathered timbers, the old oak tree on the hill, and most poignantly, a portrait of Ethan himself, rendered with surprising skill and insight. In the drawing, Ethan was standing by the fence, looking out over the fields. His stance was one of quiet strength, but there was a sadness in his eyes that Nathan had captured perfectly. It was how the boy had seen him on that first day. A man carrying a burden of grief too heavy for one person to bear alone. Turning to the final pages, Ethan found drawings he hadn't seen before. Sketches of Nathan's time at the farm. There was one of Martha sitting beside his bed, her kind face lit with a gentle smile. Another showed Gabriel at the kitchen table, hands folded as if in prayer. And there was a sketch of Ethan reading aloud, his expression softer than in the earlier portrait, the sadness in his eyes tempered by something that looked remarkably like contentment. The last drawing in the book made Ethan's breath catch. It showed two boys sitting side by side at the piano. One he recognized immediately as Nathan, the other a fair-haired child who could only be Joseph. Their hands were on the keys, their heads bent close together as if sharing a secret, their faces alight with a joy that transcended the paper it was drawn on. Below the drawing in careful script, Nathan had written a single line: "The song is finished now." Ethan closed the book, gently holding it against his chest, as tears he had been too numb to shed finally came. He wept not only for Nathan, not only for Joseph, but for all the moments of connection he had denied himself in his grief, for the 2 years he had spent in solitary pain when he might have been healing through relationships with those around him. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Martha stood there, her eyes understanding, as she took in his tear-stained face and the sketchbook he clutched. "The Reverend is ready to discuss the service," she said gently. "When you're ready." Ethan nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I'll be right there." Martha hesitated, then added, "Nathan left something for you, on the piano. He asked me to tell you after he was gone." Curious despite his grief, Ethan followed Martha to the main room. On the piano, propped against the music stand, was a folded sheet of paper. His name was written on the outside in Nathan's careful handwriting. With hands that trembled slightly, Ethan unfolded the paper. It was sheet music, he realized, the composition that Nathan had played Joseph's unfinished work, now completed. At the top, in those same careful letters, was a title, "Summer's Last Song." Below the title, Nathan had written a dedication, "For my father, Ethan Calloway, who taught me what it means to be loved." Ethan stared at the page, overwhelmed by the gift Nathan had left him. Not just the music itself, but the acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them, the recognition of Ethan as his father in every way that truly mattered. Gabriel, who had been watching from across the room, spoke softly. "He worked on it for several days, whenever he had the strength. Martha helped him write down the notes." Ethan looked up, meeting Martha's gaze. "You didn't mention this." She smiled gently. "He wanted it to be a surprise. A gift for after he was gone." A gift indeed, perhaps the most precious Ethan had ever received. A piece of both boys, of Joseph and Nathan, preserved in notes on a page in a melody that would endure long after they had both departed. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Both of you, for helping him with this." Gabriel approached, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Nathan was a remarkable child," he said. "In his short time here, he touched all of our lives deeply." Ethan nodded, unable to speak. Nathan had done more than touch his life. He had transformed it, had awakened him from the living death he had chosen after Joseph's passing, had reminded him what it meant to care, to connect, to love, even in the face of inevitable loss. As they settled at the kitchen table to discuss the funeral arrangements, Ethan felt a strange sense of déjà vu. He had sat at this same table 2 years ago planning Joseph's service, his heart numb with shock and grief. But this time was different. This time he was not alone with his pain. This time there were hands reaching out to him, supporting him through his sorrow. And this time, though, the loss was real and raw. There was also a sense of completion, of a circle closing. As if Nathan's brief life had been exactly what it needed to be, had touched exactly who it needed to touch, before reaching its natural conclusion. "I'd like the service to be on the hill," Ethan said, his decision made. "By Joseph's grave. And I'd like—" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'd like to play Nathan's composition, the one he completed. I haven't played in years, but for this, I'll find a way." Gabriel nodded in understanding. "A fitting tribute," he agreed. and I think Nathan would be pleased. The rest of the discussion passed in a blur of practical details. The time of the service, the readings that would be included, who would speak. Through it all, Ethan felt a growing resolve, a determination that Nathan's funeral would not be merely an occasion for mourning, but a celebration of a life that, though brief, had been filled with meaning and impact. The seasons turned as they always do, each bringing its own challenges and joys to the Callaway farm. Winter melted into spring, spring blossomed into summer, and soon it was August again. 1 full year since Nathan had arrived on Ethan's doorstep, changing the course of many lives in his brief time on Earth. The farm had transformed in that year. The clinic was now fully established with 2 small wards added to the main house and Samuel Fletcher visiting 3 times a week to provide medical care. Children came and went, some staying briefly for treatment before returning to their families, others remaining longer when there was nowhere else for them to go. Some, like Daniel, became permanent residents. His spinal condition, while not curable, had improved with proper bracing and care. He now moved about the farm with greater ease, his limp less pronounced, his confidence growing daily. The piano had become his particular passion, his natural talent nurtured by Ethan's patient teaching. Martha had officially moved into the farmhouse as well, bringing Emma with her. Her own home had been converted into additional space for the children who came for treatment, a practical solution that had evolved naturally as their work expanded. If there was a deeper relationship developing between Martha and Ethan, it remained unspoken for now, a slow and careful rebuilding of hearts that had known great loss. On the anniversary of Nathan's arrival, Ethan found himself drawn to the hill where the 2 boys rested. The morning was similar to that day a year ago, clear and warm with a gentle breeze rustling the tall grass. The markers stood side by side, Joseph's weathered by years of exposure, Nathan's newer but already beginning to blend with the landscape. Someone had placed fresh wildflowers on both graves. Daniel and Emma Ethan suspected, as they often came here to sit and talk, forming their own connection to the boys they had never met, but whose legacy they lived every day. Ethan settled on the grass between the graves, feeling not the sharp pain of grief, but a quiet gratitude for the gifts both boys had brought into his life. Joseph, his son by birth, whose brief years had taught him the depth of a father's love. Nathan, his son by choice, who had shown him that love could flourish again, even in the shadow of loss. "It's been a year," he said aloud, his voice carrying on the morning air. "So much has changed. I think you'd both be pleased." He went on to describe the clinic, the children they were helping, the music that once again filled the house. It felt right to share these developments, to include them in the continuation of what they had helped begin. As he spoke, a sense of peace settled over him. Not the numbing absence of feeling he had cultivated after Joseph's death, but a true serenity, an acceptance of both joy and sorrow as integral parts of a life fully lived. He was about to rise when the sound of music reached him, faint at first, then clearer as the breeze shifted. Someone was playing the piano in the house below, the notes of summer's last song floating up the hill with remarkable clarity. Daniel Ethan thought practicing the piece he had mastered over the past months. But as he listened, Ethan realized that something was different. The arrangement was more complex than the one he had taught Daniel, with harmonies and counter-melodies that enhanced the original composition while remaining true to its spirit. It was as if the song itself was evolving, growing, developing in ways that honored its origins while embracing new possibilities. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. In that moment, he felt a certainty beyond rational explanation, that the song would continue to change and grow, that it would be played by other hands in years to come, that the connection it represented would extend far beyond his own lifetime. Some legacies, he understood now, were not measured in material possessions or even in bloodlines, but in the ripples of influence that spread outward from a life touching others in ways that could never be fully traced or counted. Joseph and Nathan, two boys who had never met in life, had created such a legacy. A melody of love and healing that would continue long after the last notes of summer had faded into autumn's approach. Ethan rose finally, brushing the grass from his clothes. Below, the music had paused, then began again. Daniel practicing a difficult passage, persistent in his determination to master it. Life continued with all its challenges and sorrows, its unexpected joys and connections. And somewhere beyond what eyes could see or ears could hear, perhaps two boys sat side by side at a celestial piano, their hands moving in perfect harmony across the keys, completing each other's melodies, their music eternal as the changing seasons, as enduring as love itself. As Ethan made his way back down the hill toward the house, toward the children who needed him, the work that fulfilled him, the future that awaited, he carried with him not just memories of what had been lost, but the living presence of what had been found a purpose. Larger than himself, a family created by choice rather than circumstance, and the abiding knowledge that some songs once begun never truly end. The end. The day of the funeral dawned clear and cool, with a crispness in the air that spoke of autumn's approach. Ethan stood at his bedroom window watching as the first golden light touched the hill where they would gather later to lay Nathan to rest beside Joseph. He had slept little in the days since Nathan's passing, spending hours at the piano. Instead, his fingers remembering skills long unused as he practiced the composition the boy had left him. Summer's last song was not technically difficult. Nathan had written it to be accessible to someone who hadn't played in years, but it required an emotional openness that Ethan had avoided for a long time. As he dressed in his best suit, the same one he had worn to Joseph's funeral, Ethan reflected on the changes of the past few weeks. The house felt different now, still marked by loss, yes, but no longer a mausoleum to grief. Nathan's presence had brought life back into these rooms, had reminded Ethan what it meant to open his home and his heart to others. The sound of vehicles arriving drew him downstairs. Through the window he could see people gathering. Not just the handful he had expected, but dozens of townsfolk, many of whom he barely knew. There were families with children, elderly, couples, farmers in their Sunday best, the school teacher, the storekeeper, faces familiar and unfamiliar, all come to pay their respects to a boy who had been in their community for less than a month. Martha met him at the foot of the stairs, her own eyes wide with surprise at the turnout. "Word spread," she explained, "about Nathan, about how he came here, about how you took him in knowing—" She trailed off, but Ethan understood. The story of the dying orphan and the reclusive farmer who had opened his home and heart had touched something in the community, had resonated in a way neither of them had anticipated. Gabriel arrived last, having stopped at the funeral home to escort the small coffin that now held Nathan's earthly remains. It was a simple pine box, unadorned, save for a carving of a piano on the lid. A detail Ethan had requested, a recognition of the music that had connected the two boys across the boundaries of life and death. The procession to the hilltop was silent, save for the rustle of grass beneath their feet and the distant call of birds greeting the morning. Ethan walked behind the coffin, carried by 4 men from town he barely knew, but who had volunteered for this solemn duty. Martha walked beside him, her quiet strength, a support he found himself leaning on more than he had expected. At the gravesite, beside the small marker that bore Joseph's name, Gabriel began the service with words of comfort and hope. Ethan listened with half an ear, his gaze drawn to the view that spread out below them. The farm with its fields and buildings, the creek that ran along the eastern boundary, the distant mountains rising blue and majestic against the horizon. It was the view Nathan had sketched so lovingly, the landscape he had somehow known before he ever saw it, with his waking eyes. When it came time for Ethan to speak, he found himself stepping forward with a steadiness that surprised him. He had prepared no formal remarks, trusting that the right words would come when needed. "Nathan came to my farm a stranger." He began, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "A boy I didn't know, with a burden no child should have to bear. I took him in reluctantly, thinking it would be for just a few days." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Those few days became weeks, and in that time Nathan became more than a guest in my home. He became my son in every way that matters." Ethan looked out at the gathered faces, seeing understanding and empathy reflected back at him. "Many of you knew my son Joseph, who lies here beside where Nathan will rest. What you may not know is that these two boys who never met in life shared a connection I can't fully explain." Nathan completed a piece of music Joseph began before his death. He drew pictures of this farm before he ever saw it. He knew things he couldn't possibly have known. A murmur ran through the crowd, some nodding in understanding, others exchanging glances of surprise or skepticism. Ethan continued undeterred. "I don't claim to understand how such things are possible, but I do know this Nathan's brief presence in my life was a gift I didn't know I needed. He taught me that hearts can heal, that love is worth the risk of loss, that beauty can be found even in the most difficult circumstances." Ethan's voice broke slightly, but he pressed on. "In his final days, Nathan asked if he could call me Dad. It was the greatest honor of my life. Today, I lay to rest my son, not by blood, but by a bond that transcends such boundaries. And I am grateful for every moment we shared." As he stepped back, Ethan noticed that there were few dry eyes among those gathered. His words had touched something universal. The recognition that family is defined not by birth, but by love, that connections can form in the most unexpected ways, that even brief encounters can leave lasting impacts. Gabriel concluded the service with a prayer, and then it was time for Ethan's final tribute. A small portable organ had been brought up the hill for this purpose. Ethan settled before it, flexing his fingers nervously before placing them on the keys. The melody that flowed forth was simple yet profound, beginning with the notes Joseph had written, a questioning, searching theme that spoke of youth and possibility. Then, seamlessly, it transitioned into Nathan's continuation, the music becoming more complex, more assured, building to a resolution that was neither triumphant nor tragic, but peaceful, accepting, complete. As the final notes faded into the morning air, Ethan felt a sense of release, as if something tight within his chest, artist, had finally loosened. The song was finished now, just as Nathan had written beneath his drawing. Both boys had completed their journeys, had played their parts in a melody larger than themselves. The coffin was lowered into the earth beside Joseph's grave, each person present stepping forward to drop a handful of soil or a flower into the opening. Ethan went last, placing on the coffin lid the harmonica that had been Joseph's final gift, a symbol of the music that had connected the two boys, a token to accompany Nathan on his final journey. As the gathered community began to disperse, many stopping to offer condolences or share a memory of their brief encounters with Nathan, Ethan remained by the graveside. Martha and Gabriel stayed with him, their presence a silent comfort as he said his private goodbyes. "I'll see that a proper marker is made," Gabriel said eventually, "something to match Joseph's." Ethan nodded, an idea forming. "I'd like it to include the title of his composition," he said, "Summer's Last Song, and perhaps a line about music continuing beyond what we can hear." Gabriel smiled gently. That seems fitting. As they made their way back down the hill, Ethan found himself walking between Martha and Gabriel, supported both physically and emotionally by these two people who had become, in these difficult weeks, true friends. Behind them on the hilltop, the two small graves lay side by side, bathed in the golden light of a September morning. Two boys united in death, as they had been somehow in life. The days following the funeral passed in a strange mixture of grief and renewed purpose. Ethan found himself unable to return to the isolated existence he had maintained before Nathan's arrival. Instead, he began reaching out, reconnecting with the community that had shown such unexpected support. He invited Samuel Fletcher to dinner, renewing a friendship that had withered through neglect. They spoke of medicine, of advances Samuel was studying, of cases that challenged him. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself engaged in the profession he had once loved, offering insights from his experience that Samuel received with evident appreciation. "You should consider practicing again," Samuel suggested as the evening drew to a close. "Not full-time, perhaps, but there's a need in this community for someone with your experience, especially with children." The idea, which would have been unthinkable months before, now seemed worth considering. "Perhaps," Ethan allowed. "I'll think about it." Martha became a regular visitor to the farm, bringing baked goods, sharing produce from her garden, sometimes simply sitting with Ethan on the porch as they watched the sunset. Her companionship was undemanding, comfortable, in a way that surprised him. Two people who had known similar losses, finding solace in shared understanding. One evening, as they sat in their customary places, Martha brought up a subject that had clearly been on her mind. "The children at the orphanage in Denver," she said. "The ones like Nathan who are ill or disabled. What becomes of them?" Ethan considered the question. "According to Gabriel, most remain there until—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Martha nodded, understanding the unspoken. "Until they die, alone without a family." "Yes," Ethan agreed, a heaviness settling in his chest at the thought. Martha was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking. My house is too big for just me now that my son is gone, and I was good at nursing him through his illness. I've experience with that kind of care." Ethan turned to look at her, beginning to understand where her thoughts were leading. "You're considering taking in a child from the orphanage, one who is ill." She nodded, her expression a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "Just one to start with. A child who might otherwise never know what it means to be part of a family." She paused, then added, "Nathan's story. It made me realize I still have something to give. That perhaps my experience with my son's illness wasn't meant to end with his death." Ethan reached over, covering her hand with his own, in a gesture of support that would have been unthinkable a few months ago. "I think it's a wonderful idea," he said sincerely. "And if you'd like, I could help. With the medical aspects, I mean." Martha's face brightened. "You would?" "Of course," Ethan said, finding that he meant it completely. "It's the least I can do after what you did for Nathan. For me." Their conversation turned to practicalities then. How to approach the orphanage, what kind of child Martha might be best suited to care for, how to prepare her home. But beneath the planning ran a current of shared purpose, of two people who had found in their separate losses a common path forward. 3 months after Nathan's death, as winter settled over the Colorado hills, blanketing the farm in pristine white, Ethan sat at his desk, writing a letter to Gabriel, who had returned to his duties in Denver. The correspondence had become regular, with Gabriel providing updates on his efforts to change policies at the orphanage regarding children with serious illnesses. Ethan's letter contained news of his own, of his decision to convert part of the farmhouse into a small clinic specializing in the care of children with chronic or terminal conditions. Of his partnership with Samuel Fletcher, who would provide more advanced medical services as needed. Of Martha's success in adopting a 7-year-old girl with a congenital heart condition, giving her a home for whatever time she might have. The idea had grown organically from those initial conversations after Nathan's funeral, a recognition of a need within the community, and beyond, a way to honor the boy who had changed so much in his brief time at the farm. It felt right, a natural extension of the healing that had begun with Nathan's arrival. As Ethan finished the letter, his gaze fell on the framed sheet music that hung on the wall beside his desk. Summer's Last Song, now professionally copied and preserved under glass. Beside it hung 2 of Nathan's drawings, the sketch of the farm from the hilltop and the portrait of the 2 boys at the piano. The piano itself stood in the main room, no longer silent and dust-covered, but played regularly, by Ethan in the evenings, by the children who now visited the farm for treatment, and occasionally by Martha's adopted daughter, whose small fingers were just beginning to find their way around the keys. Music had returned to the Calloway farm, just as life had returned to Ethan himself. Not the same life he had known before loss altered its course, but something new, something built on the foundation of what had been, while incorporating the lessons grief and love had taught him. Rising from his desk, Ethan moved to the window that overlooked the hillside where Joseph and Nathan rested. Snow covered the ground, pristine and peaceful, with the 2 markers standing like sentinels against the white expanse. In the crisp winter air, they seemed to glow with an inner light, a reminder of the 2 boys whose brief lives had left such indelible marks on Ethan's heart. A small smile touched Ethan's lips as he remembered Nathan's final words, "The song is finished now." It was true, in a way the boy might not have fully understood. The composition was complete, yes, but so too was a chapter in Ethan's life, the period of isolated grief that had held him captive for 2 long years. What lay ahead was a new movement in the symphony of his existence, one that incorporated the sorrows of the past while building toward a future of purpose and connection. Nathan had given him that gift, had shown him that hearts can heal without forgetting that love is worth the risk of loss, that beauty can be found even in life's most difficult passages. As twilight settled over the farm, Ethan lit the lamps and moved to the piano. His fingers found the keys without hesitation, beginning the now familiar melody of Summer's Last Song. The music filled the house, flowing through rooms that had once been silent with grief, but now resonated with purpose and possibility. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, windows in heaven, as Nathan had described them, through which those we have loved and lost might look down upon us. Ethan played for them, for Joseph, for Nathan, for the boys who had been in different ways his sons. And as the final notes of the composition faded into the quiet evening, he felt their presence not as a weight of sorrow, but as a blessing, a reminder that some connections transcend even death itself. The song was finished now, but its echoes would continue to shape Ethan's life in ways he was only beginning to understand. A melody of love and loss, of grief and healing, of endings that become in their own way new beginnings. A summer's last song that carried within it the seeds of all the seasons yet to come. Spring came early to Colorado that year, the snow melting from the hills, while patches still lingered in the shadowed hollows. On the first truly warm day of the season, Ethan stood on the porch of the farmhouse, watching as a wagon made its way up the drive. Gabriel Wilson returning from Denver, a small figure seated beside him on the bench. "Ethan," Gabriel called as the wagon came to a stop, "I've brought someone I'd like you to meet." Ethan approached as Gabriel helped his passenger down, a boy of about 10, thin and pale with a pronounced limp, and a serious expression that reminded Ethan painfully of Nathan in those first days. "This is Daniel," Gabriel explained, "from the orphanage in Denver. He has a condition affecting his spine, and the doctors there say—" He trailed off, not wanting to speak too explicitly in front of the child. "I understand," Ethan said, kneeling to bring himself to eye level with the boy. "Hello, Daniel. I'm Ethan Calloway. Welcome to my farm." The boy regarded him with solemn eyes. "Reverend Wilson says you help kids who are sick," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "Kids like me." "That's right," Ethan confirmed. "And I'm very glad to meet you." Daniel glanced around, taking in the farmyard with its buildings and animals. "It's nice here," he observed. "Peaceful." "It is," Ethan agreed, rising to his feet. "Would you like to see inside? Martha has made cookies, and I believe her daughter Emma would be glad for some company." As they moved toward the house, Daniel hanging back, slightly uncertain in these new surroundings, Gabriel murmured to Ethan, "There are more children at the orphanage who could benefit from your care. The policy is changing slowly, but there's still resistance to placing the terminally ill in homes." Ethan nodded, understanding the unspoken question. "Bring them," he said simply. "As many as can travel safely. We'll find room." Gabriel's expression was one of profound gratitude. "I knew I could count on you." Inside the house, transformed now into a combination of home and small clinic, Martha was indeed baking. The scent of cinnamon and sugar filled the air, creating an atmosphere of warmth and welcome. Emma, her adopted daughter, sat at the kitchen table, her dark curls bent over a book. She looked up as they entered, her face lighting with curiosity at the sight of Daniel. "Emma," Martha said, "this is Daniel. He's come to stay with us for a while." The girl smiled shyly. "Hello," she said. "Do you like to read? Mr. Calloway has lots of books." Daniel nodded, some of the tension leaving his thin shoulders at this simple overture of friendship. "I do," he replied, "especially stories about animals." "Me too," Emma exclaimed, her initial shyness forgotten in this discovery of common ground. "I'm reading about horses right now. Would you like to see?" As the children bent their heads over the book, Martha caught Ethan's eye, a silent communication passing between them. Satisfaction at this small connection forming hope for the healing it might bring to both children. Later, after Daniel had been settled in the room that had once been Nathan's, Ethan and Gabriel sat on the porch watching as the sun set behind the western hills. In the barnyard, Emma was showing Daniel the new lambs, the boy's limp pronounced, but his face animated in a way it hadn't been upon arrival. "You've created something remarkable here, Ethan," Gabriel observed. "A place of healing, not just for the children, but for everyone involved." Ethan shook his head modestly. "It was Nathan's gift," he said. "He showed me what was possible even in the face of loss." Gabriel nodded in understanding. "Some souls come into our lives briefly, but leave lasting impressions. Nathan was such a soul." "Yes?" Ethan agreed, his gaze drifting to the hill where two markers stood side by side, visible in the golden light of evening. "Nathan and Joseph both.